When I was around 14 or 15 years old, I never used to like going out by myself. I would pretty much always travel with at least one friend, and if on the odd chance I had to go out by myself, I would always equip myself with headphones so people know that I'm not wanting to be approached or chatted to. This was mostly because from a young age, it became very clear to me that strangers only were going to approach me with sales offers or something more sinister in mind, and I had been warned of stranger danger by my parents a lot. Anyways, one day, I had to go into town by myself to meet someone. I arrived pretty early, mostly down to bad timekeeping and anxiety of being late, so I had a lot of time to kill. I decided I would go and wander around some shops while I waited. Entering the first shop, I had done a lap or two of the clothes section, and started to get an awful feeling that I was being watched. This feeling was making me feel sick with worry, so I kept checking around me and made note of who was there. I noticed a few times an older man, looking a bit out of it, dressed in all beige clothes, wearing a beige hat, looking directly at me. He was quite tall, so he was easily noticeable over the clothing rails. After seeing him a few times in the same shop, I figured it must be a coincidence and left that shop to avoid him. Then I went and sat on a public bench and started texting my mom in a state of concern. As I looked up from my phone, I saw him again, standing on the corner of a different shop, looking directly at me with a gormless glare. I was very uncomfortable at this point, and when I saw him, I stood up and walked to a very public area. When I got there, I turned around and he was still there, staring at me. He noticed that I saw him, and he slowly started walking towards me. What I did next might not have been the smartest idea, but I was a freaked out teenager. I walked away from the crowded area and into a makeup shop. I got the attention of one of the saleswomen, and we spoke about some items they had on sale. While we were speaking, I didn't notice any sign of the man following me anywhere. Eventually, I walked away from the saleswoman without purchasing anything, and with no sign of the man, I left the store. The moment I left the store, I saw him again. He had stood outside the shop, waiting for me to leave. I was very freaked out at this point. I was sweating from stress. I called my mom and said I was worried someone was following me, and told her not to hang up. In my state of panic, I completely forgotten about my meeting with my friend, and my mom reminded me. I walked back to where we were meeting, and while I was still on the phone with my mom, When I arrived at the meeting spot, it was pretty much isolated off from the public, but I still stayed on the phone, telling my mom the exact location where I was. It took around 5 minutes for my friend to turn up, and I said I didn't want to be in town anymore. And this time, my mom had contacted my grandparents to come pick me up, as they pulled up shortly after meeting my friend, and we stayed at my house. I never went to town alone again. This was around 2006 to 2008. I was 6 or 8 years old at the time. I was a little blonde girl with blue eyes and chubby. I lived in a popular beach town with lots of tourists, and what comes along with that is crime. There's attempted kidnapping in broad daylight here. My parents had a house in the second nicest neighborhood, considered to be very safe. This was in October. I loved putting up decorations for the holidays, and the house my parents had 2 big trees in the front yard. I was putting up the fake spiders on the trees when 2 men in a beat-up white sedan came to a stop in front of the house. One was white, one was black. Both had long beards and sunglasses on. I can't remember which man said what, but one said, "You're doing a good job." I didn't respond because my parents told me not to talk to strangers. Then he yelled, "I said you're doing a good job," in a very rude tone. I said thanks. My dad was sitting on the front porch and started walking to me. but when the two men saw him, they sped off. My dad looked like a bodybuilder, and he's in his mid-60s now, and he still has a six-pack somehow. Now, I know you might think this may not be the scariest experience, but considering the crime in my town and this whole event, it just wasn't a good experience. I still wonder what would have happened if my dad wasn't watching me. To this day, if I see a young kid by themselves, I ask where their parents are, and they usually respond with, like, in the store or something. And I wait for the kids until their parents come out, and I give them a warning about what would have happened if they left their kids unattended. I'll normally get a response like, "Don't tell me what to do with my kids," and I explain to them that there's so many people walking by and that they can snatch their kids, and since this is a tourist town, your kids can get kidnapped and they'll be in a different state by the end of the day. I still really hope for parents to watch over their kids 24/7, unless they're in your home or at school or with someone they trust. I'm so thankful my dad was overprotective. I am still haunted by an old memory of an ex-boyfriend I dated only for a few months. We met online and lived an hour apart, but we clicked very fast and started seeing each other regularly. Things were going great for about a month, and then one day, we stopped at my place so I could pack some clothes to go stay at his place for the weekend. We walked into my bedroom, and as I started packing my belongings, I noticed him scanning around my room with his eyes. After a few awkward moments of silence, he began to ask me some very specific and eerily detailed questions. Do you ever move your pillow to the foot of your bed at night and pull your blinds all the way up so you can see the stars out this window over here before you go to sleep? I bet you use this lamp over here the most. It's the only one that I'd use. I was frozen in shock. I just stood there speechless, looking at him in disbelief. He just described everything I did the night before, and it was the only time I ever rolled up my blinds at night and laid at the opposite end of my bed to look up at the stars in the sky. I told nobody about that, so how the hell did he know? The only thing I could do next was laugh it off and ask how he knew, but he just kinda shrugged it off and changed the subject. I couldn't stop thinking about it the whole weekend though, wondering if he had been watching me. I hid my paranoia as best as I could until I got home, but I then did a deep sweep of my entire bedroom, looking for any signs of hidden cameras or anything, but I found nothing. I didn't have any laptops, computers, TVs, or any sort of security cameras in my bedroom that he could have hacked to spy me on. I did have a mobile phone in my room, but it was laying flat on my nightstand that night. If he was physically stalking me, it would have been difficult for him to see into my bedroom, as my room was up high. He would have had to watch me from further away into the forest, and even if that were the case, there were some large trees in my backyard that would have blocked his view. It just didn't make any sense, and it still doesn't make sense. I tried to pass this off as a coincidence, but when I stepped back and looked at the whole picture, there was something not right about this guy. I vividly recall the first time I ever spoke to him on the phone before we met. We had so much in common, almost too much in common. From the books we were reading to the very specific interests, hobbies, and habits, I thought he was my soulmate. Nobody ever made me feel so alive. He swept me off my feet, only to drop me from what I thought was heaven. He became a different person, seemingly overnight. He was a narcissist, and I watched his mask fall off. We had texted on and off for a few years later, but I've since gone no contact. I will probably never know the hows or whys, but I continue to wonder and look over my shoulder.